He organized a meeting with every powerful person he knew on campus, expecting to bury me in a room full of witnesses. He had no idea I had 47 documents, 4 federal grants, and a compliance officer from the NIH Office of Research Integrity joining by video at 10:14. The meeting was on a Monday in February 2025, second floor of Breckenridge Hall, oval table, 12 chairs. Every powerful person on that campus was in the room by 5 minutes to 10. The provost, the head of research, the lawyer, a trustee, the people who decide whose name stays on a door. Nolan Ashby was at the head of the table, in a slim charcoal suit with no tie, and the top button undone, the haircut of a man who is always about to be photographed. And me, 12th chair, closest to the door. There was a laptop at the far end of the table, closed. Nobody mentioned it. My name is Gilbert Tremblay. I am 58 years old, professor of biomedical engineering and associate dean for research at Hartwell University in Raleigh, North Carolina. I joined Hartwell in 2003. By the morning of that meeting, I had been on the faculty for 22 years. In those 22 years, I had published 214 peer-reviewed papers. None of them had a fraudulent attribution, not one. I was, at the time of that meeting, the principal investigator of record on 4 active federal research grants. The largest was an $8.2 million grant from the National Institutes of Health, due for renewal that April, a $6.1 million grant, also from NIH, a $12.4 million Engineering Research Center grant from the National Science Foundation, a $7.3 million grant from the Department of Energy, $34 million, all told, 4 grants, all 4 with my name on them. Mine, principal investigator of record. That phrase matters. When the NIH calls Hartwell, they don't call the president's office. They don't call a vice president. They don't call a director of anything. They call me. The program officers and I have driven to dinner together in 3 different cities. None of them, in all those years, had ever met Nolan Ashby. I was raised in Flint, Michigan. My father was a machinist at a transmission plant. He spent 41 years standing at a lathe. He paid for my first semester of college out of a coffee can on top of the refrigerator. I went to Michigan State on a state scholarship, finished my doctorate in biomedical engineering in 1994, and walked straight into academia. No military service, no Wall Street detour, no family money, just 30 years of being first in line to the lab in the morning and last to turn the lights off at night. The price for that career was the part of my life that didn't fit between grant deadlines. My wife Constance has taught high school French in Raleigh for as long as I have been at Hartwell. We have been married 31 years. Mathieu was born during my 3rd year on the faculty. Simone, 2.5 years after him. They are 29 and 25 now. There is a photograph on the corner of my office monitor, slightly bent, of Simone at her doctoral qualifying exam at Duke. I was not there. I was in Bethesda, defending the renewal of one of the grants I just mentioned. Constance went. Constance always went. Nolan Ashby joined Hartwell in 2014. He was 26, fresh doctorate from Stanford. He drove a leased BMW, freshened every 2 years, steel Rolex on the left wrist. He took the parking space closest to the main entrance of the engineering building, because that was where the campus magazine photographers would catch him walking in. By his 4th year on the faculty, he had given more keynote addresses than he had submitted grant applications as principal investigator. By his 8th year, he had given 22 conference talks and held the principal investigator role on exactly 0 federal grants. He had figured out something my father's generation never understood. You don't have to do the work. You only have to be the face on the day they take the picture. In 2017, Forbes ran a feature on him, 30 under 35 in biomedical research innovation. I read it on a Saturday morning at the kitchen table. He had described as the foundation of his research vision, a study on membrane permeability. 4 people had written that study. A doctoral student of mine named Claire Weston had been first author. I had been senior author. Nolan Ashby's name was nowhere on the paper. It was nowhere on the grant. It was that morning on the front page of Forbes, attached to our work. Claire texted me from the 2nd floor lab where she was finishing her dissertation. 3 words. "That's our work, Gilbert." I told her I would handle it. I thought at the time time that I meant I would speak to him. I thought it was carelessness. People get sloppy with attribution in press coverage. That's what I told myself. By 2019, the pattern wasn't carelessness anymore. He was citing our group's findings to alumni donors at fundraising events. He was in conversations about a new endowed chair, the Ryland Chair in Translational Engineering, and his fundraising pitch was built on a foundation he had never poured. Claire had moved to Stanford by then. She sent me one more link, a donor event summary, our work, his vision. That night I sat at my kitchen table at 11 in the evening with a cup of black drip coffee from the 12-cup machine that had been on the counter since the kids were in middle school, and I opened a folder in Dropbox. I named it Research Record. I dropped in the Forbes article. I dropped in the donor summary. I dropped in the original paper. I went to bed. I did not build that folder as a weapon. Scientists build records. We build them for everything. A discrepancy in attribution gets a record. That's what I did. Nothing more. 6 years later, that folder had 47 documents in it. If you've ever been told you're not ready by someone who couldn't do your job for 5 minutes, you know exactly where this is going. Like and subscribe. In October of 2023, I sat in the audience at the Translational Medicine Forum in Chicago. I was there for an afternoon panel review for the National Science Foundation. I stayed for the morning keynote because the keynote speaker was Nolan Ashby. He was standing at a podium under a logo the size of a small house, pacing in his slim suit, and he described the most recent paper from my group, Membrane Permeability Dynamics in Drug-Resistant Oncology Models, published earlier that year, as findings from my group. The author list on that paper was Weston, Bell, Tremblay, and a current doctoral student of mine. 4 authors. He was not one of them. After the keynote, a colleague found me at the back of the hall and clapped me on the shoulder and told me Nolan was really making a name for our department. I said something agreeable. I do not remember what. I do remember walking out of that hall and into the gray Chicago air and standing on the sidewalk for a long time without moving. Then I went to my panel review. I did the work I had flown there to do. In January of 2025, the president of Hartwell University, a man named Wainwright, created a new role called Director of Translational Research Innovation. He appointed Nolan to it directly. There was no national search. The faculty senate was informed, not consulted. Nolan had spent 4 years cultivating every administrator who might have objected. There was nobody left to push back. The morning after the announcement, I read his post on a professional networking site. Exciting new directions in research governance at Hartwell. He framed the appointment as his own initiative. He did not mention the president by name. He did not mention me at all. A week later, on Tuesday the 14th at 9 in the morning, he sat across from me in my office and explained that as director, he would now be added as co-principal investigator on the renewal application for the $8.2 million grant. The renewal was due in April, 3 months away. He used the word collaboration 4 times in 9 minutes. He concluded with a sentence I had been hearing in different forms for 6 years. Gil, you've been doing the foundational work. I can take it to translation. That's the story NIH wants to hear now. We'll both win. Foundational work. The word he had been using to describe 22 years of federally funded science, as if it were the unglamorous part, the dirt under the building. I told him no. 1 word. He told me he would speak to the provost. He did. Between the 14th and the 16th, he was in the provost's office twice. The provost called me on the 2nd day late afternoon. Raymond and I have known each other for 11 years. He's not a bad man. He is a careful man, and he had been told this was about modernization, and he wanted to know if there was a way through it. He used the word flexibility. I let the line stay quiet for a moment. Then I said the only thing I planned to say to him. Raymond, adding Nolan without his having contributed to the science is a grant integrity issue. He told me he understood. 4 days later, he sent a written directive instructing me to cooperate with the co-principal investigator request or face a lab space and resource review beginning the 1st of February. He sent it under the letterhead of the office of the provost. He copied the president. He copied Nolan. I read it twice. I printed a copy. I put it in a manila folder on my desk next to the legal pad. I went home. Constance was at the kitchen counter heating cassoulet. She did not ask. She knows the look. She knows the rule. I do not tell her things I am still deciding. I tell her things I have already decided. I could have explained to Raymond that no provost, no university president, No director of anything can compel a principal investigator to add a co-principal investigator on a federal grant. That is not how the federal grant system works. The PI's affirmative consent is required. The funding agency's approval is required. An institutional letter does not override either. I knew this the way you know your own home address. I did not say it. I had already decided. That night, 11 in the evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the legal pad and a cup of black coffee, and I wrote by hand, in my own handwriting, the first draft of a complaint to the Office of Research Integrity. I worked on it for 2 evenings. On the second evening, I called Claire Weston in Palo Alto. I told her what I was going to do. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, very quietly, "I've been waiting for you to call." She had her corroborating letter ready inside an hour. On the 3rd of February, 2025, at 9:15 in the morning, I uploaded the formal complaint through the Office of Research Integrity portal. The complaint named Nolan Ashby. It cited 4 specific instances of material misrepresentation and 2 specific instances of public misattribution. I attached the 47 documents from the folder I had been keeping for nearly 6 years. I attached Claire's letter, and I attached Raymond's directive of January 20th, with the president and Nolan copied on the front, as evidence that the institution was not merely failing to address the misappropriation, but actively pressuring me to legitimize it. By federal regulation, the Office of Research Integrity must notify the institution's research integrity officer within days of receiving a formal complaint. That officer at Hartwell reports to the Vice President for Research, Dr. Janet Holloway. Janet had been in rooms where Nolan misattributed work for years. She is 62. She had the patience of someone who has watched this particular kind of careerist come and go at 4-year intervals. Janet called me on the 11th of February. She did not say much. She asked one question. She asked whether I would object if Dr. Karen Whitfield, the Office of Research Integrity Compliance Specialist now assigned to the matter, attended Nolan's governance meeting on the 17th as a federal observer. I said I had no objection. I did not smile. I said, "That seems appropriate." Nolan sent the invitations to his governance meeting on the 13th. By that point, Dr. Whitfield was already confirmed. Nolan didn't know that, of course. He spent the days between his invitation and the meeting building the production around it. He had picked up from somebody near the provost's office that a research compliance matter had been mentioned in passing. He didn't know what it was. He didn't ask. He decided the best move was a show of force. That is the way his mind worked. He had built every other career problem into a content moment. He saw no reason this one would be different. On the 14th, he posted a follow-up on the same professional networking site. He announced a Research Innovation Vision meeting for the 24th, a week after the meeting he had organized for the 17th, at which he would, in his words, operationalize the new governance framework across all federally funded research portfolios. 280,000 followers. The post got 9,000 reactions inside an hour. He tagged the president of the university. The president's office did not respond, but Nolan didn't notice that, and neither did anyone reading the post. He did not consult the general counsel before sending the meeting invitations. He did not consult the board's academic affairs committee. He did not consult Janet Holloway. He believed the institution he had spent 4 years cultivating was by then his. I went to work the morning of the 17th, the way I went to work every other morning. I drank a cup of black coffee at the kitchen table at 6:15. I left the legal pad in the kitchen. I took only one paper notebook to the office that day. I had decided the night before that I would carry nothing into that room I did not want a federal observer to see me carry. The 47 documents were already where they needed to be. Raleigh that morning was the kind of February that doesn't commit to weather. Flat, overcast, no rain in the forecast and none on the ground. The grey that just sits over the campus from the parking lot to the engineering quad. I walked from my office to Breckenridge Hall, the way I'd walked it 10,000 times before, past the bench where Mathieu had once waited for me at age 7, eating a sandwich, past the magnolia tree that flowered too early most years, past the loading dock at the back of the chemistry building. I was not thinking about any of that, but I was registering it, the way you register the temperature of a room you're about to leave. I was the first one in the governance committee room. The laptop was already on the far end of the table, closed. The cable from the wall ran behind a chair leg. Janet came in second. She nodded at me. She did not sit down. She walked the length of the table once and looked at the laptop and then sat at her usual chair and opened her leather portfolio and uncapped a pen. She did not look at me again. She did not need to. By 5 minutes to 10, the room had filled in. The provost, the faculty senate president, the general counsel, a tall man with a habitually skeptical look and a watch that didn't keep time, a board member from the academic affairs committee, the department chair, 2 associate deans, the seats filled in order of arrival the way they always did. I sat in the chair closest to the door because that was where the sole faculty member who had been called to the meeting belonged. I was on the invitation list as one of 7 faculty observers, even though every other observer was an administrator. Nolan came in last. He came in at 3 minutes to 10, the way a man enters a room he believes he owns. He had a binder. He had already started speaking before he reached his chair. He spent the first 4 minutes of the meeting describing what he called the next-generation governance posture Hartwell needed for translational research portfolios in an environment of evolving federal compliance expectations. He named me twice. He used the word collaboration 3 times. He used the phrase fresh perspectives on legacy research operations once. The general counsel was making notes the entire time. Janet was not. She was watching her own pen. At 12 minutes past 10, the provost cleared his throat. He said the room was joined for this discussion by a federal observer from the Office of Research Integrity. He said her presence had been arranged on short notice as a courtesy, given the complexity of the questions on the agenda. He said her name was Dr. Karen Whitfield, and she would be joining by video. He nodded at the associate dean closest to the laptop, who reached down, opened the screen, and turned it to face the room. The screen woke. Dr. Whitfield's face filled it. Auburn bob, charcoal blazer, the small federal pin on her lapel, a neutral pale wall behind her, the camera framing her shoulders and head only. It was 10:14 in the morning. The faculty senate president stopped writing. The general counsel set his pen down very gently. The board member from the academic affairs committee, who as far as I could tell had not known that Dr. Whitfield was going to be in the room, looked at the provost and then at Janet, and then at the laptop, and then back at Janet. Janet did not look up. Nolan looked at her face on the screen for a moment. Then he smiled. It was the smile of a man who has not yet understood that the floor underneath him has changed temperature. He said, "Welcome, Dr. Whitfield. We're glad to have your perspective. This is a routine governance review of our translational research portfolio." Dr. Whitfield said good morning. She said she had a few questions. She said the office was, at present, in receipt of a formal complaint filed under federal research misconduct procedures and would like to clarify, on the record, one specific item from the meeting agenda. She did not look at her papers when she asked it. She had reviewed them in advance. She had reviewed them carefully. She asked Nolan to describe his specific contribution to a paper titled Membrane Permeability Dynamics in Drug-Resistant Oncology Models, which he had cited as findings from his group at the Translational Medicine Forum keynote in Chicago in October of 2023. It was 10:17. The room got very quiet. Not the kind of quiet a room arrives at by accident. The kind a room arrives at when every person in it has, at the same moment, understood the same thing. Nolan kept the smile on his face for 2 seconds longer than he should have. Then he said something that I have heard variations of in faculty meetings for 30 years. He said, "I appreciate the question, Dr. Whitfield. As you know, attribution practices in interdisciplinary translational work can be nuanced. The boundaries between foundational discovery and translational impact are necessarily fluid. My role on that paper was," Dr. Whitfield said, "Dr. Ashby." He stopped. She said, "I have the published paper here. I'd like to read the author list aloud. Please confirm whether your name appears on it." She read the author list. 4 names. Weston, first author. Bell, second. Tremblay, senior, the current doctoral student of mine. 4 names. She read each name slowly, with a small pause between them, and at the end of the 4 names she stopped and looked at the camera and did not say anything else. It was 10:19. I did not move. I have been at long tables in academic medicine for 30 years. I know what the room sounds like when something has gone irreparably wrong inside it. The sound is the absence of paper. Nobody was making notes anymore. The general counsel had set both of his hands flat on the table. Nolan opened his mouth twice. Then he said, into the quiet of the room, "I'd like to speak with my attorney before continuing." It was 10:21 in the morning. The faculty senate president looked at the general counsel. The general counsel looked at the provost. The The provost looked at Janet. Janet looked at her notepad. She did not write anything on it. The general counsel said, "I would advise that we adjourn this meeting until counsel can be consulted." The provost said, "Adjourned." Dr. Whitfield said she would be in contact with the institution's research integrity officer to discuss next steps. She thanked the room. The screen went dark. The associate dean, who had opened the laptop, closed it again. He did not look at Nolan when he did it. It was 10:29. 29 minutes from open to close. 8 minutes from Nolan's request to the formal adjournment. People stood up the way people stand up after a meeting they are not allowed to discuss outside the room. Nolan was still seated. His binder was still open. He was looking down at the second page of it. I do not know what was on the second page. I've spent some time wondering. I imagine it was the slide he had planned to use to walk the room through the new governance posture for federally funded research. I imagine he was reading the first bullet on that page and trying to make it mean something. I closed my notebook. I put it in my left coat pocket. I stood up. Janet did not look at me. I walked past the laptop. I walked past Nolan. He did not look up. The general counsel was already on the phone to the president's office. I could hear the first half of the sentence as I passed him in the hallway, and the first half of the sentence had the words "potentially significant federal exposure" in it. I walked back to my office the way I had walked from it, past the loading dock, past the magnolia tree, past the bench where Mathieu had eaten the sandwich. I sat down at my desk. I opened the manila folder on the corner of the desk, and I looked at the provost's directive of January 20th, and I did something that I had been thinking about doing for almost 6 years. I closed the folder. I put it back in the drawer. I took out the renewal application for the $8.2 million grant, due in April. The application named one principal investigator, mine. I started reading it from the first page. The phone on my desk rang 3 times in the next 40 minutes. I let it ring. The fourth call was Janet. I picked up. She said one sentence. She said, "He has been sent home. The president's office has asked for a memorandum by end of day." I said, "Noted." She hung up. I went back to the application. The campus by then did not yet know what had happened. The general counsel was on the phone in his office. The provost was on the phone in his office. Nolan was driving home in the silver BMW with his binder in the passenger seat, the LinkedIn post for the 24th still pinned to the top of his profile. He didn't take it down, not that day, not that week. It would be there for everything that came next. The cascade started on the 18th, quietly, the way these things start when an institution has been told something it cannot unhear. The Office of Research Integrity opened a formal investigation under federal research misconduct procedures. The 47 documents from my Dropbox folder were submitted in their entirety. Claire Weston's letter from Stanford was on file by Wednesday morning. 3 faculty members at Hartwell, none of whom I had spoken to about any of this, provided voluntary statements over the next 10 days. One of them, a senior cell biologist who had heard Nolan misattribute a piece of work at a recruiting dinner in 2021, called the Hartwell Research Integrity Office on his own. He had not been asked. He had not been told the inquiry was open. He had been waiting for a reason to make the call for almost 4 years. That is the part nobody explains in the careerist version of this story. Inside an institution, the people who watch the misattributions happen are not paid to track them. They track them anyway. They have a memory the LinkedIn post does not. On the 22nd of February, 5 days after the meeting, Nolan was placed on administrative leave. The communication went out as a faculty memorandum on a personnel matter pending the outcome of a federal inquiry. It was 3 sentences long. He was instructed to vacate his office, surrender his university access credentials, and refrain from contacting students or staff during the inquiry. The provost signed it. Janet Holloway initialed the cover sheet. The general counsel had it sitting in a drawer the morning after the meeting and waited until the second business day to release it. Nolan's Research Innovation Vision meeting was scheduled for the 24th. It did not happen. The post for it stayed up. He never took it down. By the morning of the 24th, the day the meeting was supposed to operationalize the new governance posture across all federally funded research portfolios, the comments under the post were still rolling in. "Congratulations on the new appointment. Looking forward to your insights." A handful of doctoral students from other universities asking how to apply for the postdoc he had implied he would be hiring. The post stayed pinned to the top of his profile, while every one of those comments became, by inches, a public record of a meeting that would never be held. By March, his profile photo was still the headshot from a TED-style conference, taken under a soft sidelight. The followers were still there, 280,000 of them. They were for several weeks the audience for nothing. A reporter from a regional business weekly called my office 4 times in early March. I did not call her back. I had nothing to say that the federal record would not say more accurately and, in time, more publicly. The Hartwell Office of Communications fielded the call instead. The reply was a single sentence stating that personnel matters under federal review are confidential and the university would not be commenting. It was the right answer. It was also the answer most people read as a confirmation. The reporter wrote a short piece about institutional silence and questions surrounding a high-profile research appointment. It ran on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, 3 of the comments under Nolan's Vision Meeting post had been deleted by their authors. He did not delete the post itself. The Office of Research Integrity issued its preliminary findings on the 15th of April. 4 instances of material misrepresentation in funded research and conference settings. 2 instances of public misattribution to non-affiliated work. The findings were not made public. The regulations require confidentiality at that stage, but they were communicated to the institution and to the named subject. Within 3 hours of the findings reaching the president's office, Hartwell's general counsel sent a letter to the Ryland family attorney. The Ryland family had endowed the chair Nolan had held since 2020, $3.1 million. Their attorney, an elderly man who had handled the original gift agreement and who had once tutored my doctoral students in patent law as a favor, requested a formal review of the conduct provisions in the naming agreement. By April 15th, the same day as the preliminary findings, the chair was renamed. The university website was updated overnight. The chair was now styled Ryland Chair in Translational Engineering, Interim Stewardship. The interim was the polite word. Stewardship was the polite word. The empty seat between them was the entire story. The $8.2 million grant renewal was due to NIH the 3rd week of April. I submitted it on the 17th. One principal investigator, mine. The application was reviewed in study section. The renewal was funded. On the 22nd of April, 60 days after he was placed on administrative leave and 95 days after the director appointment, Nolan signed a confidential separation agreement with Hartwell University. The terms were what those terms always are, a no disparagement clause for both parties, resignation rather than termination, severance, the size of which I have never been told and have never asked. The 14-episode video series he had been hosting on the university server, Research Disrupted, was removed from the server as part of the separation. The student email accounts of his 14 doctoral students and postdocs were transferred to other faculty advisors. 3 of those students came to my lab. I met with each of them individually. I did not tell them what I thought. I asked them what they were working on. The first one, a 3rd-year student who had been thinking about a particular polymer permeability problem for 6 months, told me she had been wanting to talk to me about it since the previous summer. We started working on it that afternoon. The campus by then had begun to forget, not because anyone had decided to forget, because there was a federal renewal under review, 2 doctoral defenses on the schedule, a search for a new department chair underway. There were the things that came next. In May, the president's office asked me to take over as interim department chair. I did not particularly want it. I told them I would do it for 1 academic year. They asked me to consider permanent. I said I wanted to go back to running the lab when the year was up. They put it in writing. I signed it. On the night I signed it, I went home, and Constance had set the table for 2. Cassoulet again. She has made cassoulet on every important night of our marriage. It is not a celebration food. It is a long-cooked thing. It needs the afternoon. The smell of it tells me she is thinking. I sat down across from her, and she looked at me and said, "You are tired." I said, "Yes." She said, "Take me to Vermont." We had not been on a vacation since 2022. The last one had ended on the 2nd day because a grant resubmission deadline had moved, and I had flown back from Burlington to spend 3 weeks in Bethesda. Constance had stayed in Vermont with a friend and driven home alone. She had never said anything to me about it. She had not needed to. In the 1st week of July, we drove the Volvo north. 16 years old, 147,000 miles on the odometer. Dark gray, washed in the hardware store driveway before we left. Mathieu sent us a text from Boston the morning we drove, asking if we wanted to meet halfway. We told him we would meet on the way back. We didn't. We drove 10 hours and pulled in at a farmhouse outside Stowe Village that we had stayed at twice before, run by a woman who keeps a dish of butter on the counter all summer because in Vermont it is acceptable. I did not check my university email from Wednesday until Sunday. I did not check the news. I read a paperback I had bought at a gas station outside Hagerstown, which was not very good and was exactly what I needed. On Friday morning, Constance stayed at the farmhouse to read on the porch. I drove into Stowe Village by myself. I went to a coffee shop on the corner where the ceiling is the original tin from the 1890 building it was first poured in. I ordered a black coffee and sat at the counter. The man at the next stool, a stranger in a fishing vest who looked about my age, asked me what I did for work. He didn't ask in a probing way. He asked the way men of a certain generation ask when they are about to tell you what they do. I said, "I teach engineering." He nodded. He told me he had been a forester for 32 years, and he was now retired, and he was figuring out, week by week, what to do with mornings. He said it took longer than he had expected. I said it usually does. We sat there for 40 minutes. He ate a donut. I read a folded-up newspaper somebody had left on the counter. There was a small piece on page 11 about a renewal of a federal cancer research grant at a university I had never worked at. I read it twice. I was thinking about the renewal of a different one, due in October, on a polymer permeability problem that had a solution I was beginning to see the shape of. I was not thinking about Nolan. I have not since. I drove back to the farmhouse. There was a post-it note on the refrigerator door in Constance's neat, upright French. "Tu as eu assez de patience." It means, "You have been patient enough." I have been married 31 years, and I do not know when she wrote it. I know she walked from the porch to the kitchen and stuck it on the door when I was not looking, and that the words were chosen the way she chooses her words when she has had time. I left the post-it on the fridge for the rest of the week. I left it there when we drove home. You want to know what 22 years of federal grant science teaches you? That the work is the record. Every paper, every name, every date. He spent 6 years taking credit. I spent 6 years keeping notes. There is no version of this story where the notes don't win. If you've made it this far, hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you've watched a quiet expert get underestimated and then watch the room change around them. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring the notification bell so the next one of these stories finds you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.